All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining us for our webinar. My name is Casey, and I'm a writing instructor calling in from St. Louis, Missouri. And before we get started on this webinar about annotated bibliographies, and I hand things over to our presenter, Max, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So first of all, this webinar is being recorded, and in a day or two, you'll be able to access it through our website. So if you have to leave early, or if you want to go over any portions of this webinar later, you'll be able to check out that recording. You'll also find many other recorded webinars on different writing-related topics. There will be several chances to interact with your colleagues and with our presenter, Max, so please be sure to participate during the chat sections in the large chat box, just like you did before the webinar started. Also, all of the links in the slideshow are active, so you can click directly on them for access to more information now or later if you watch the recording. We also have a few helpful files in our Files pod, and you can download them by clicking on the Download Files button at the bottom of the pod. That's where you'll find a copy of the slides for this presentation. There's going to be a lot of information in this webinar, and if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A box. I'm going to be watching the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and I'll answer your questions as quickly as I can. If we run out of time, however, or if you have any questions later on, you can send them to writingsupport@waldenu.edu, and you'll get a response through email. Finally, if you encounter any technical difficulties, you can feel free to reach out to me again in that Q&A box, or there is the Help button in the upper right-hand corner of the webinar screen, and that's the Adobe Connect Help button, so that's often the best place to start out. So thank you again so much for joining us, and now I'm going to turn things over to our presenter, Matt.
Thank you very much, Casey. And can you just confirm that you can hear me okay? Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. It is my pleasure to be presenting this session to you called Essential Elements for Writing Annotated Bibliographies. My name is Max Philbrook, and I am a writing instructor here in the Writing Center. I've worked in the Writing Center for almost 5 years now, so I have read a lot of student writing from undergrad, master's level, all the way to doctoral level capstone writing. And one thing that I've noticed across all of those levels is that the need for being able to use sources well in evidence-based writing is so important at each of those levels. And that's why I'm very pleased to be here presenting to you this session on annotated bibliographies, because the annotated bibliography is a tool that you can use to help you improve your skills with that evidence and source-based writing. Before I begin, I'd just like to give a great thanks to Casey, who is a wonderful writing instructor in the Writing Center as well. If you've ever worked with her in a paper review session, you know how helpful and smart and dedicated Casey is to you writers at Walden. I'd also like to say hi to our captioner tonight, Karen. Thank you so much for providing accessible captioning for our students. One of my very favorite parts of working at Walden is how dedicated we are as a community to making our resources and our education accessible. So thank you so much, Karen, for being here. And thank you all. I was following along in the chat before the session started today, and I am just so impressed and so amazed that we can all be here together in this same space, even though we are spread out all over the world and all over, and not just all over the world, but we all have different research interests. The diversity of students that come together in these webinars is amazing. And so without further ado, what if we started with a audience participation question? So likely most, if not everyone, is at least somewhat familiar with what an annotated bibliography is. And so what I'd like you to do in the chat box is maybe do some reflecting, put in some ideas that you might have about what are the benefits of completing an annotated bibliography, and how might the annotated bibliography support your work as a scholar. So I like to start with this question because sometimes the annotated bibliography can feel like a series of hoops to jump through or unnecessary obstacles. But if we think hard enough about it, let's come up with some benefits. And I'll go on mute here and give people a chance to type into the box. So thanks, everyone. I'm seeing a lot of really great answers coming in through the chat box. I see people writing a lot about using sources, partaking in the reading of academic research, advancing your writing skills as a scholarly writer, information. A lot of people are writing about the benefits of an annotated bibliography because of the information that you can gather. These are all wonderful, wonderful responses. And for that person who wrote, I honestly do not know, maybe at the end of the session, if we ask this question again, hopefully you'll have some good responses there. But not to worry, that's why we're here. We're here to learn, and we're here to practice some of these ideas. So thank you all very much. And now let's dive into the session. Thanks, Casey, for switching the layout. So what we're going to do today in the next 54 minutes is we're going to work to understand the purpose of the annotated bibliography. And it sounds like many of you have a good handle on that already. So I'll keep that in mind that we had some really good answers in the chat box there. Then what I would like to do is I'd like to teach you the 3-section method for writing annotations for each of your sources. The 3-section method is a kind of a standard practice here at Walden, and I'd like to teach you a little bit about each of those sections. Then we'll do some practice, and I will ask you to read and analyze annotations so we can look and see what each of those 3 sections does: the summary, the evaluation, and the application. And then finally, we're going to take some time at the end to practice revising and identifying areas within those annotations that might need some work. And for my money, I think having a chance to have a hands-on approach to the annotated bibliography and looking at it critically is a great way that you can learn how to make those changes in your own writing as well. Before we go further, I just wanted to make sure, since I am in the Writing Center, and the Writing Center deals with APA quite a bit, I just wanted to make sure that everyone here was aware that recently the Writing Center and Walden University as a whole has transitioned from the previous APA style to the current 7th edition of APA 7. So hopefully this is not news to you. And even if it is, the slide here is full of links to the Writing Center's resources where you can learn more about the new style. We've done the work for you and identified the major changes that are relevant to Walden writers, and we've created resources that will help you learn how to apply those new changes to your writing. If you have memorized the APA 6 manual, don't worry, you don't have to memorize a brand new manual. The APA 7 is an extension of APA 6 with minor tweaks that are actually really helpful and in the long run will help streamline your writing. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page with APA 7. All of the information and examples in the presentation tonight are done in APA 7. So that is rest assured that we are working from the APA 7 style manual. If you have questions about that, check the resources here, or just let Casey know in the Q&A box, and we'll see if we can get those questions answered, or at least point you in the right direction. All right, let's begin on our learning objectives today. What is the annotated bibliography? Well, according to the APA manual, or more precisely, the publication manual of the American Psychological Association, annotated bibliographies, quote, consist of reference list entries followed by short descriptions of the work called annotations. And that's on page 9 if you want to find that in the APA manual. So at the very essence, what an annotated bibliography is a collection of sources that have something to do with your research project. And these sources, primarily when you're working at Walden, are from scholarly sources like journals, books, textbooks, or data that's published by credible organizations. And what you are doing is you are collecting those sources, and you are analyzing and summarizing and evaluating each source individually. So the second plank on the pyramid there is annotated bibliographies give the researcher a chance to share the literature that is applicable for their specific project. And annotated bibliographies follow APA guidelines for writing style unless there are specific requirements in the assignment prompt. And I added that at the bottom of the pyramid because I wanted to emphasize that Walden assignments, coursework assignments for the annotated bibliography, are very context dependent. The assignments for annotated bibliographies that you get at Walden are specific to oh, sorry everyone. I was having a little bit of technical difficulty with my headset, and I see from the captioner that I'm back online. So here at Walden, we have a very particular way of doing annotated bibliographies that those assignments require of you. But what I wanted to just point out is that an annotated bibliography is a tool. It is something that you can use for your purposes, so you can get something out of it, and you can use that information later in your project. So at the heart, the annotated bibliography is a collection of sources. So if we go into a little bit more depth here about the annotated bibliography, we can see that the annotated bibliography allows you to do certain things. So as you're collecting those sources and writing about those sources and interpreting and reading and being critical of those sources, you are able to demonstrate your knowledge and critically assess the literature in your field. You can share the value of a source to the reader. Part of the annotated bibliography entry is your evaluation of that source. It gives you the opportunity to say, this is a good source, or this is a source that needs some work. You are able to inform fellow and future researchers about the quality of sources. You are able to gather sources for the literature review. And sometimes the literature review and an annotated bibliography are compared to one another. They are very different documents, even though both involve collecting and organizing sources. The purpose of the literature review is quite different than the annotated bibliography. In fact, if you think about your overall timeline here at Walden, the annotated bibliography is something that will come first and is something that you can develop over time and add to and develop and curate and grow whereas the literature review is a very specific writing assignment that you will only do in certain types of writing at Walden. So the annotated bibliography allows you to gather a lot of sources that you might use later in your process to write your literature review. And as many of you pointed out in our brainstorming session before, the annotated bibliography is a great way for you to do something with those sources. I know all of us have a folder on our computers that is just full of research articles. And unless you take the time to do something with those research articles, nothing happens. Trust me, I have been buying every magic wand on the internet that I can find in order to try and wave it over that stack of papers so the information will just go into my brain. But so far that hasn't worked. So far there is no magic wand or special cure to get that information. You have to do something with it, and the annotated bibliography allows you to gather that information. So I added a little note here that if you are a doctoral capstone student, and I know that some of you are, thanks for being here. Keep up the good work. Trust me, it gets better. The annotated bibliography is a tool that is especially useful for that type of student. The pile of research articles for doctoral writing gets a lot bigger than the pile of research papers for other levels of writing. All right, so that is kind of the intro. That is what an annotated bibliography is. What does an annotated bibliography look like? Here is the general accepted structure of annotated bibliographies here at Walden. As you can see, we've got an introduction and a conclusion. As with most coursework writing, the introduction and conclusion are very helpful and necessary components. But then what you'll see between those is individual annotations of each source. So you handle source 1 and you complete the annotation for source 1, and then you move on to source 2. Complete the annotation for source 2, and move on and complete the annotation for source 3, and repeat, depending on what the assignment asks of you, and depending on what your purpose is for the annotated bibliography. And why I mentioned the context about the annotated bibliography earlier is because in the introduction and conclusion, you're really able to give your reader some information about what the purpose of that annotated bibliography is. Now, if you're using an annotated bibliography just as a tool, if it's not for a class, if it's not intended for others to read, if it's just for your own purposes, then the introduction and the conclusion are not necessarily important. You might want to add a little bit of information at the beginning of your annotated bibliography if it's just for you. So when you come back to it later, you'll know what type of sources you're dealing with. But the introduction and the conclusion is really important when you're writing an annotated bibliography for Walden coursework. If you're turning it in for a grade or as some evidence of your research process, you'll definitely want to have a fully formed introduction and a fully formed conclusion. And with that, I'd like to ask another question, and I'd like to open it up to the audience again. What you know about annotated bibliographies now, and what you know about introduction writing, I'm curious what you all think might be useful information to include in the annotated bibliography introduction. So I will go on mute. There are no wrong answers here. The introduction is very context-driven, so think about a writing situation where you might use an annotated bibliography and see if you could come up with some ideas of what you might put in the introduction of that document. Good luck. Okay, I am seeing some excellent answers here for this question that I'll be honest, it's kind of a hard question because you don't know specifically what you're writing this introduction for. Some of the positive quality answers I'm seeing, an overview of the topic. I think that's an excellent bit of information to put in the annotated bibliography. Some of you, I saw at least one person write a summary of the research project. And so not just the the topic summary, but also what your intervention might be. Uh, Someone said problem, purpose, history of the topic. These are great answers. I even saw someone write thesis statement, which is a really safe bet that in an introduction to a document you'll have a thesis statement. Now, in the annotated bibliography, your goal is not to make an argument or to establish a position. So maybe instead of thesis statement, we could think about it more as a blueprint statement or a description of what your goal is for completing the annotated bibliography. Excellent. Yes, I'm just reading back through the chat. These are really, really quality answers, everyone. Wonderful. So I am seeing some great critical thinking here. There's already some awareness of what an annotated bibliography is. Very nice. And skip ahead to the next slide. Excellent. Thank you for arranging the layout, Casey. That's great. All right, so we'll continue forward. And so now what I'd like to do is zoom in on the part on each individual annotation. So remember from the organization slide, there's an introduction and a conclusion, and then between those are individual annotations. Each source gets its own annotation. Here at Walden, we ascribe to the 3-section method for annotations. And so each annotation consists of the following. First, an APA-style reference entry that gives the reader a full view of the publication's information for the source. So, and that just goes right by APA style. If you are curious or if you have questions about reference entry style, you can see in the gray box there on the slide, there are active links that will take you to the Writing Center's webpage for each of those pieces of information. You might need to download the slide deck. And as Casey pointed out earlier, in the pod at the bottom, there's a files pod. You could download the slides here. And I recommend it because all of the links included in the slide deck are active and will take you to the Writing Center's resources. So, a reference entry followed by 3 sections. Usually each of these will get its own paragraph. Summary of the article, analysis of the article, and the application of the article. So, 1, a summary of the information presented in the article. 2, your evaluation and analysis of the article itself. And then 3, how you might apply the information from the article in your own work. And these aren't just 3 random topics. If you do each of these sections well, you will have all the information you will need to really understand the article or the study and all the information you will need to decide whether or not this is a good source for your own research process. So for each source you are annotating, you will include each of these 3 sections. So let's jump right in and let's take a closer look at each of the 3 sections of a standard annotated bibliography entry. First, the summary paragraph. All of you, if you've ever done source-based writing, you've done summary writing. A summary is when you take the information from the article and you give a brief overview of the main points, the features, and the findings, the methodology, the approach, the context, the data. You're citing the facts from the article. And so this is the first paragraph. You are giving the facts. And in these boxes here, I've given just some questions for you to ponder. One of the best ways that I think you can learn about writing annotated bibliographies is by thinking about the questions that someone might ask or the questions you might have about the article. And so some ideas to kind of get you brainstorming about the summary paragraph. What is the topic or the purpose of the study? What are the main conclusions of the source? How did the author organize the information? What kind of sources did the author use? But you're also describing the article or the study itself. And so maybe the methodology used by the authors of the article, maybe that is good summary information that would be relevant to your reader. What actions did the researcher perform? What were the methods? Who was the population? What was the theoretical basis? And then there's always outside information, context information that might be helpful also for the reader or for you later. What is the context? Who is responsible for publication of the source? What other sources in this source is this source in conversation with? And what do you make of the data? So as you can see, all of these questions are leading you to make statements about the content of the source. You're stating the facts about the source. And that's very important to keep in mind here in the summary paragraph. Focus on the facts. And now in this list, I'm getting into a little bit more of the writing tips for the summary paragraph. So focus on the facts. You don't need to analyze yet. You don't need to bring in your opinion or editorialize. Use the past tense. According to Cresswell, 2018, or Cresswell argued, Cresswell stated, use the past tense because you are stating what the author has done in the past. It's really important to go beyond just the abstract. You want to get down into the weeds. You want to make sure you know the details that surround all of the entire study, not just what's reported in the abstract. Paraphrase. Use your own words to summarize the information. Avoid quotations. And this is good advice, I think, in scholarly writing in general. Your reader is more interested in what you have to say about the article more than they are interested in what the quotation from the article is. Don't include everything. This is a very important point. You can't include a summary of everything, so you need to be really smart and critical about what facts and information you provide. You have to put yourself in the minds of your readers so you can decide what is important here, what matters, what should I focus on. Then, and so this bullet here, name the authors at least once. Publication year is optional. So we'll see in the sample paragraph in just a moment that there is a bit of an art form to using citations and source identification in the summary paragraph. You need not provide a formal APA citation every time you're mentioning information from the source. Once you name the authors, then you can start to be creative and start to refer to the authors in different ways. And I'll show you some examples of that later. The publication year is optional here because you're only talking about one source. And just prior to the summary paragraph, you've introduced an entire reference entry so the reader knows precisely what source you're talking about. And it's important to avoid anthropomorphism and avoid passive voice in your summary paragraphs. And I'll show you another example of that too. But I always encourage active writing, using active verbs, and avoiding to be verbs, because the more active your verbs are, the more descriptive and the more precise your writing can be. So let's take a quick look at that. Okay, so I've added some links here and have gone into a bit more detail about paraphrasing and avoiding quotations. Here is an example of the past tense. Fauci 2020 argued that. The central claim of Nader 2019 was, so that's the past tense. Avoiding anthropomorphism is important because it allows you to be very precise. Instead of writing the study reported that, a more appropriate and precise specific way to state that is the authors of the study reported that. A study itself can't report something, just as a table can't walk or something like that. You want to make sure you're putting the agency for what happened on the correct subject. And here's what I mean about active verbs. Thompson et al. Reported that. And that is an example of the active voice and avoiding the passive voice, whereas a more passive construction is, it was reported by Thompson et al. That. And the reason that I put this in here is because the word it is a very unclear pronoun. It is a pronoun that can really stand in for anything here. And so if you move the subject to the beginning of the sentence and then use an active verb, Thompson reported, now your writing is clear, your writing is strong, and your writing is active. And I think that's really important in the summary paragraph because it can be a bit more difficult to follow along with your ideas if you're disguising the subject and if you're using to be verbs instead of using those active past tense verbs. All right, so let's take a look at a summary paragraph. And so I'll mention that this paragraph is not a 100% perfect. It's not the best ever example of summary, but it illustrates some of the features and some of the strategies that I was just talking about. So a couple of things to note. Thompson et al. At the beginning. So there's a formal citation. Here then in the second sentence, Thompson et al. Shows up again, but the publication year has been omitted. And then if you look down the next sentence, we have the researchers predicted that supervisor support will reduce role stressors. There's an example of changing the way you identify the source, so it's a bit more reader friendly. Note also that the first part of the paragraph is about the facts and the findings. And here towards the bottom of the paragraph, we have more information about the methodology and the conclusions that Thompson et al. Posited in their study. So here is the first example of a summary paragraph. And remember, the summary paragraph is the first of 3 paragraphs you will write about your source. And so if I was reading your annotated bibliography, I would read the reference entry, then I would read the summary paragraph, and next I would move forward and I would be looking at paragraph 2, which is the analysis paragraph. Analysis, of course, is when you break down something and you look at the component parts that constitute that something. So in this case, what you analyze is up to you, but the important thing to keep in mind is that you are breaking down the component parts of the source and you are providing your evaluation of those features. So the purpose of the analysis paragraph is to evaluate relevant features of a source to show the reader your opinion of the quality of the source. And so now I've included the word your opinion of the quality of the source. So remember, the annotated bibliography is a tool for you, the writer, to use. And so now your evaluation and your opinion is starting to become important here. So what can you say about the quality of the source? Well, you can analyze the information and evaluate the information. Is there information included that is unnecessary? Is there information left out that is necessary? Is the source too detailed or too broad? As a scholar, you are also responsible for evaluating the source methodology. Was the methodology of the study sound? What, if any, information is missing? Is there evidence of researcher bias? Is the article scholarly or generalizable? Why or why not? And you can also evaluate the sources of data. Is the data used appropriate for the report? Could the government or organization department have bias? Does the report leave out any key information? So the evaluation, the analysis paragraph is your opportunity to look closely at the individual elements of a source. And these three that I included, evaluating the information, evaluating the methodology, evaluating the data, these are only three options. There are many other elements for an article or a scholarly source that you could analyze. I've put these here because it kind of allows you to see what the task is that's ahead of you. So keep that in mind. Your opinion matters here. What you think about the source matters. And so let's look at a few tips and strategies for looking at the analysis paragraph. Read critically. Take questioning or critiquing notes. This is really your chance to say, hey, this source is good because, or this source needs work, or this source is bad because. Focus, and this one, the second bullet here should look familiar. It was also in the first list for the summary paragraph. Focus on relevant and important features of the source. Make fair evaluations of those features. For example, if the source is not exactly 100% perfect for your specific study, it might not be fair of you to evaluate it negatively for that. Or if the source was written in 2014 and you criticize the source because it doesn't have the most up-to-date data, that's not really a fair evaluation. You have to make sure that you are evaluating it critically and yet evaluating it fairly. Make sure you look for presence of bias. I think now, more than ever, with the internet and with information being passed and changed at such a tremendously fast rate, we need to be even more critical and even more aware of where the information is coming from and if there's bias involved with that. And then you might also evaluate the trustworthiness or the credibility or the validity of the source. All of these things would be very useful features to include in your analysis paragraph. So I would like to please ask you to do a little bit of work here. In the chat box, after reading this paragraph, I would like you to please identify what the writer of this annotation has evaluated from the Thompson et al. Source. So read the paragraph and then see if you can identify what those specific features of the source have been evaluated by the writer here. All right, we'll take about 60 seconds, see what you can do. Well, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how people are writing, and we'll come back. So remember, where's the analysis? What is the writer analyzing from the Thompson et al. Source? Good luck. I see that people are still typing, so I'm going to mute again for a few more breaths, and then we'll come back together and we will take a look at the responses and the paragraph. Thanks, everyone. Excellent. Very, very good. Very good. I'm seeing a lot of correct answers. I'm seeing a lot of specific examples of what the writer here is analyzing. Nice job. So, if you look closely, in the very first sentence, we see the writer stating that Thompson et al. Made a significant contribution to the field of police research. So there is a positive evaluation. The writer sees that Thompson et al. Has a source that is significant and a significant contribution to the field as a whole. But in that same sentence, we also see that the main point of this paragraph, though, is to identify the limitations. So the first limitation, yes, whoever focused on the idea of the sample size, yes, the specialized sample size, which in the opinion of the writer of this annotation was indeed a limitation. So that is an effective analysis of this particular article. So then the next here we have the sentence that begins second, the researcher potentially influenced results. There, I think we are critiquing the methodology. And so those of you who identified the methodology as being analyzed here, yes, excellent. The researchers, according to the writer of this annotation, the researchers were asking leading questions, and they were not using proper qualitative research methodology. And then we have a nice wrap-up sentence here at the end describing the two types of analysis that were taking place. So here we have a nice balance between the positive and the negative, and the focus was on limitations having to do with the methodology and the sample size. And so this is one example of how you can zoom in and you can get specific about your analysis for the article that you're looking at. So excellent work, everyone. These are definitely, the analysis paragraph, I think, is the most tricky because it really asks you to show that you know what the important pieces of a research article are and that you have an opinion about those, and you can identify when it's a quality, when it's been done in a quality way, or when it's been done in a way that needs more work. So thank you for your participation. Lots of great answers. I'm very impressed with the collective mind of this group. Way to go, group. So let's move forward and let's look at the application paragraph here. And so this is the third and final section of the annotation. And so we've got our reference entry for the source, and then we've summarized the information of the source, and then we've evaluated the source, the component parts of the source in our analysis paragraph. And now we're going to explain how the source contributes to your understanding and how you might use this source in your own research. The application paragraph is your opportunity to decide and express how this source will be useful to you or how it is not useful to you. And to me, this is a perfect paragraph to go last in your annotation because this is really the make or break information. This is the time in the annotation where you get to show to your reader or show yourself, your future self, yes, put this in the use pile, or no, put this in the back to the library pile. So, some questions to consider. How is this source useful to you? Does the source provide useful context? Can the source fill in gaps or give the reader general knowledge? How is this source useful to other researchers? Does the researcher fill a gap in the literature? Is the article universal or generalizable? How does the article extend or build upon previous studies? And finally, how is the source useful to the field as a whole? And so you'll want some balance of these three ideas, but remember the application. How will you apply this study to your research project? And so this is where you can use I. This is where you can use me. This is where you can use my. And so the application paragraph is very personal. Include what you've learned. Did this source do something for you? Did it give you additional information about a topic that you hadn't really thought about? Did it give you a whole new direction to go in with your research? Then on the second bullet there, be as specific as possible. Be specific. Describe what the fact is that you learned. Describe what section of your capstone project you might use this in. This is where you can be very specific. That way, when you come back to your annotation later, it's there, it's helpful, you can use it. Be selfish. Think about what the source does for you. Now use the first person. I will use this study. My research will benefit from this by. And continue, though, to support your assertions with explanations. So you can't just leave it at, I will use this article. You have to describe why. And that's when you have to use those specific examples from your own research and also from your own writing, having an awareness of your own project, but then also having an awareness of the information from the source. Very important. So don't just say, I will do this, I will do that, but also explain why, how, and specifically what information you're going to use. So here's what I'd like to do at this point. Let's take a look at, and just another quick note here. You can use I and my, but you still want to avoid I think, or in my opinion, because you still want to firmly root your facts, your assertions with examples and with specifics. So make sure that whatever you're claiming, make sure that you are doing so in a way that that is founded in fact, and that kind of avoids those I think, I believe, in my opinion, statements. So let's do this. Casey, let's skip the chat box. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just point out where this writer is describing the usefulness of this source. And so the usefulness of the Thompson et al. Source for the particular research project that the writer is working on. So right in that first sentence, you can see this study was valuable to my understanding of, and now, so it's valuable to my understanding. And now the second part of the sentence, so important, the specific piece of information, the specific topic that it's valuable to. How a female police officer's experience may be different than a male police officer's. And then here are some additional facts about why this study is valuable. It's not generalizable, but the literature review is helpful to any scholar. And then there's a bit more of an application about what could be done. And so I kind of think of the application paragraph as a letter or a postcard to future me. I'm writing to me in the future who will be writing the capstone and who wants to be able to go through this information quickly. And so that is just a very brief example of what an application paragraph might look like. And there is the example there. And so the reason I wanted to skip that activity is because I wanted to make sure that I could pause and call on Casey to help answer. Let me know if there's any questions that came up in the chat box that would be worthwhile to verbalize and to answer for the group. So, Casey, was there anything that we should touch on before we go into the final parts of the presentation?
Thanks, Max. We've had some great questions and keep sending those in. But one thing I think would be especially important to talk about is you mentioned naming the author in your annotation. And so there's some confusion. Would you ever cite another source in an annotation for like if I'm creating an annotation for a source that you published, would I ever cite something from some other scholar in that annotation so that I would need to specify when I'm talking about your source versus some other source?
That's a really interesting question. And I think it really depends on the assignment that you're working on. So, what Casey is saying is if I'm annotating the Philbrook 2020 source, uh, what I was saying before is that you don't need to provide a proper citation because the Philbrook 2020 source is the only source that you're working with. But I think this hypothetical is a good one to think about because, yes, Casey, there are circumstances where you would bring in a different source in an annotation. I think those circumstances are rare, but I think they would show up maybe in the analysis portion. And I think that they might show up in the evaluation portion. So you might be comparing the source to other maybe seminal works. You might be comparing the source to other sources that you have in your annotated bibliography. In that case, I would use a proper citation. I would use Philbrook 2020 even though it's the annotation for that source. And then let's say I'm bringing in the Cresswell source into my annotation for the Philbrook source. Now I will use a proper formal Cresswell 2020 citation as well. And so I think that, but if it's a standard annotation, you're just focused on the one Philbrook source, and you're summarizing and you're evaluating and you're applying just that one source, that's when you can kind of be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more informal with the citations that you provide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think you're pointing out just like that it's really important. The main thing is that your reader should be able to tell where you're getting the information, right? That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. I really like the way you summed that up. Make sure your reader knows precisely which source the information is coming from. Absolutely. And then if you are focused just on that one source, that's when you start to be able to be flexible and kind of creative, and dare I say, artful when it comes to your citations. Yes, citing sources in scholarly work is an art form. I said it there. That's the writing teacher in me coming out. I think art is probably the last thing people think of when they think of citations. Anyway, okay. Writing teacher nerdery aside, Casey, any other questions to address for the group?
I think that's good. We can keep moving on. Thanks.
Absolutely. And so, like Casey said, if you have questions, keep them coming in the Q&A box. And then I will also, if you have questions after the session, we've got a lot of Writing Center resources that I will share with you here at the end. So I'm actually going to skip forward. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. If you're curious about more examples of analysis and application, you're more than happy to look at these slides later. And I've just got some, some revision opportunities, another chance to look at these paragraphs, an evaluation and application paragraph. But in the interest of time, I would like to start to close the session today with a brief review. So, review. Annotated bibliographies are your way to demonstrate your knowledge and critically assess sources. They allow you to evaluate the value of a source. They allow you to inform your own research process with additional resources. And that's really the heart of it. The annotated bibliography is your chance to collect and read and do something with your research. It's a chance for you to gather your sources for the literature review. It's a chance for you to take notes and master the content in your field. And then it's written for an assignment. It's written for preparation for a final or longer paper, perhaps the literature review, chapter 2 of your doctoral capstone. And it's written for your own personal use. And that, I think, is the most important thing. Even if you're writing your annotated bibliography for coursework, use it for what's valuable to you. It has to be useful to you, otherwise it's not worth doing.